But we have a few minutes for Neil and I to chat, but more for you to chat with them. So I have a number of questions written down, but I'm going to come straight out to the audience. And I thought that was very good, by the way. You're probably still better than me. We've got someone right at the back straight away before I can even get my words out. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4. You're going to have to remind me. 1, 2, 3, 4. Anybody else with a question? Right, let's start with those 4. So at the back there. No. So can we hear the mic? Roving mic? Do you want to try again? Hopefully the AV's fixed that. There we go.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay, hi. My name is Sagar. My interest is in supply chains. Also, my interest is in open source because for me to get to healthy supply chains, these need to be decentralized and localized, probably to something that used to be 100 years ago, but how do we modernize them for the new century? My question, having researched in the supply chain for the last 10 years, is this notion about net zero, and net zero being clean.
Yeah.
So my roots in the global south, and I'm here to request...
So I'm going to stop you, because we've got Neil for 15 minutes to talk about AI.
My question is that if we are to talk about net zero, and equality for all people everywhere, surely we have to talk about the fact that the net zero is built on the back of slavery of Africans and Indians in the global south.
Please,
and how do we open source it?
So would you, sorry, we need to focus on the questions and the opportunities.
Well, it's about net zero.
Sorry, can you hand the mic back so we can get to the next question? Sorry.
It's about net zero.
Answer
that quickly. So I work with a group called Data Science Africa, and most of what you're doing, I mean, it's the same challenge. It's about empowering people wherever they are in Global South to bring about their vision through software. And in Data Science Africa, most of what they do is education, in the way we just heard that was going on in Nigeria. I didn't actually talk about net zero at all. But when it comes to anything that anyone wants to do, disenfranchising people by imposing software solutions made by 4 big tech companies upon them is a very, very bad idea. It's like a return to the Catholic Church owns the information infrastructure. And we are not doing enough to push back against that.
Thank you. So I'm going to take 2 to 3 questions together so that we can get as much opportunity to talk about AI with Neil as we can. Can we go back?
Yeah, I think there's a point or sort of comparison that keeps getting made with Silicon Valley. And I think, I mean, I go there 2 or 3 times a year just to keep feeling that culture, because it's a completely different culture. What Silicon Valley often represents, which people do not understand if they're not in it, is that that's open source and technology based really strongly in a sense of civic responsibility. You're much more likely to get people contributing 15 hours a week to open source and you just shift their attention over to a new project than to instantiate their careers. I am wondering a little bit, what is digital civics? What do you see as a responsibility of individuals in this?
Just before we answer that one, can we take the 3rd question as well, please? Yeah.
Hi. You mentioned about how we need to be more open. And of course, when you talk about coding, it's way easier sometimes. You go in GitHub and find. But one problem that I encounter on our organization, government, is data access.
Yeah.
So if you want a small company or SME or someone to go and try to build a project and they need a lot of that data, either it's public, geographic, but we see that even government data is locked. And then, of course, for some companies from Google, sometimes to take their coding and sort it out that data is way easier than someone. So how can we make data, the source that will feed all those coding, more interesting and open to everybody?
Thank you. Thank you. And just grab that 4th question down there to the gentleman there. So far, we've got civic society, data, and...
Hi. Neil, you mentioned empowerment. And Amanda, today we're talking about open source. Are you aware that there are software developers that have been jailed and now there's a waiting trial
So I think that's actually an interesting point, going back to your guild's point, and it's one of my notes here. So if we can take those three, and then we'll come over to you and take another three and try and answer them quickly.
I love the civic responsibility point, and I think that this is where it's the classic UK thing. Let's go on about London, 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 when actually there's great stuff in London. We're here at King's, there's brilliant things going on here. But actually, a lot of this civic duty is spread through our whole university ecosystem. And we kind of have a campus UK that's all interconnected. But there's no understanding or acknowledgement that that's something that we should be built on. That's where we're internationally leading. And what I think you see constantly is this sort of low-rent Silicon Valley activity. You've got tech entrepreneurs who would like to be Silicon Valley tech entrepreneurs. And so they try and ape them. But we get to this point where they don't have the 2 orders of magnitude level of funding, so then the companies go abroad. You have to look at what the UK advantages are and double down on those. And many of those, there is that civic responsibility, but it's somehow not infecting this tech ecosystem in the way that you would expect. And I think it's a really, really interesting question. On the data access, yes, it's something that I've been working on for a very long time in terms of, it's clear when it comes to AI, it's not just about open code anymore, because that's how what you've got going on at the moment is the big tech is, oh, that's great. Thank you very much, academic ecosystem, for all this great code you've contributed to. We'll combine that with our data, and then, Clay, we've fixed AI. And that's really damaging to companies that want to enter. And I think, in particular, I think as we ape that Silicon Valley system, we're not supporting companies that want to enter. And they've got so many barriers, companies that want to actually solve the problems we care about, like in health or social care or education or energy. All the things we care about, we want these people to be capable of setting up a company using the open source ecosystem, using open source data to solve the question that they want to solve. And you can see a number of those things. Access to capability, access to data, access to software. And when it comes to openness in AI, this is why that's one of the pillars, because 2 of those pieces need to be discussed and understood. And then the final piece around, which is a really important question, because yes, you sort of see you've got problems in the AI Act, in which it might make it be illegal to build certain types of model. I think we're still getting to grips. I don't want to at all sort of say we can just be not thoughtful about this and these capabilities and what it means to open source them. We have to think carefully about that. So maybe there will need to be some regulations around this. But it seems we're not having a sensible conversation around that. It seems that conversation seems to be happening in private by, I believe that there's regulatory capture, for example, in the UK at the moment, where large tech companies are saying we need to prevent open. And government swallowing that on a security argument. Now, we can't ignore the security argument, but that should be an open conversation. We should hear what those tech companies are saying, what their arguments are, so that we can explain what the alternative perspective is.
And just picking up on what that last gentleman said about developers in jail, you are not above the law because you do open source. And the important thing is to understand how the laws are going to apply to open source, and that those who are making them have an understanding of what they're doing. And I would say, and our next keynote speaker in a few minutes will elaborate on this, that there are some issues around the regulation and the way the terms open source are being used in that. And I think we're going to have an interesting conversation over the next hour or so around all of this. So I'm going to take 2, 3 if we've got them. There's a lady here, gentleman there. Is there a third question? Right, we'll stick with those 2. And after that, we'll have to wrap up, I'm afraid.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk. It was fascinating. You mentioned that using the services or the intelligence that was in open source was like breathing it in and breathing it out. But it's almost the point, isn't it, for it to be so accessible and so free. So if we had full government attention, what are you suggesting for this to become better incentivized, if this was your point?
Yeah,
and the lady here, do we have another mic? This last question.
Hi, Neil. I was just wondering, what does being human mean to you?
Yeah. I'll start with government attention first. So I think that the challenge we face is, it's a pervasive challenge in government. It's happened many times before. If you look at entrepreneurship around the Industrial Revolution in government, there's enormous problems for the people who are developing steam engines getting government to be interested in what they're doing. And it's to do that there's always a lag in terms of government's interest. Now, Sir Patrick Vallance has pushed very strongly the need to have more tech in government and more tech integrated with decision making. And I think that vision's a very good vision. I think the problem we faced in AI is that just as that vision was coming out, the government panicked around AI. And so instead of following the roadmap they were given, I don't know what Sir Patrick thinks, but my impression watching it was they made a large number of very foolish decisions about who they were listening to, because in those moments of panic, you listen to the people who are most confident. And those people who are most confident are the ones that don't know what they don't know, and they're the ones with least knowledge of the wider ecosystem. But it's just natural for humans, coming back to the sort of human thing, to, when they're worried, the person that says, this is the way, this is the thing you've got to worry about. But in a very disruptive technology environment, it's absolutely not the way. Someone that is so confident, you would say, no, just please move along. Let's have the people that know what they don't know and know who we need to bring in the room and who we listen to. And that's how an open source community works. But, I kind of phrased what they did as digital trustonomics at the time. The interesting thing when trustonomics occurred is, the Treasury, the Financial Times, everyone pushed back because there was awareness of how stupid this is within the ecosystem. What we need to do is get that awareness in government, in newspapers, in all these entities, such that the next time governments attempted to do something foolish, they can hear from the right people. And it's not about, undermining the democratic process. It's about giving them the best advice available so that they've got the right spectrum of choices. Tough thing is cultural change. Cultural change is the hardest thing to change. What does human mean for me? I think maybe this comes home to a lot of people. I lost my brother who was 2 years older than me. And when you watch, he had cancer. And when you watch someone dying young about regretting the things that they weren't able to do, you get a totally different perspective on life, don't you? Now, it's a great privilege that we all grow up as children and that we don't have to think about that. And, hopefully as children, we don't have to experience that. And we get this wonderful naivety about the world. And we love seeing the world through children's eyes. It's another thing because there's that potential there. That's another piece of being human. So it's perfectly all right for us to not all go around worrying about that the whole time. But it strikes me that when you look at our big tech companies, we've remolded them as children. They have no moral responsibility. Every time they do some selective good in society, they shout it from the tops of the mountains and we all have to cheer them. They constantly make these sort of naive errors that we would tell our children off for, but somehow we kind of accept it because, of course, they make a lot of money. And I think that that's associated with how we've undermined the humanity in many of our processes. So what we really would like to happen is to have institutions that care about some of those things, care about how we die, care about how we look after those who are more vulnerable, and we treasure that in society. Care about how we're defended, the people who put their lives on the line through their careers, and yet all we're celebrating is people who made billions solving problems no one used to know that they had. And I think we need a fundamental change in that. And the reason why this is an amazing community to do that is because the reason people are involved in open is because they like that community thing. And if we can share that ethos, if we can bottle that in some way and propagate that more widely through society, I think we're in a very good place. And I think that's kind of what the manifesto is trying to draw attention to.
That's an incredibly poignant end, so I'm not going to try and top it in any way. Neil, thank you. There's an absolutely huge amount for us to take away from that conversation, and there was a line that Neil used about deep tech rather than weak tech that I've never heard anybody say before. Deep tech rather than weak tech. And I think that's something that the open source community brings to the infrastructure it works on and to the tech sector as a whole. And that's something that perhaps we need to educate more on as we work through this next stage with the new government.